Today, we say Chag Sameach, and it's a more complicated Chag Sameach. Today, Yizkor falls on the Hebrew Yahrzeit of October 7th, which last year was the morning of Shemini Atzeret. So in addition to remembering our own lost loved ones as individuals, we also have the somber collective task of remembering the first Yahrzeit of the 1,200 who were murdered exactly a year ago today. That many dead is unfathomable to me. But we must fathom it. Together, we must figure out how to remember too many to remember. So let our presence today be our answer to an unimaginably long and painful shared Yahrzeit notice of a kind. We're here to remember among the many Karmit Katzir's father. If you were here in the sanctuary or in Kol HaNeshama over Yom Kippur, she spoke about her experience as a member of Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. And she shared a little bit about her experience. Her father was murdered and her mother and brother were taken hostage. And she shared, please listen to her own words, but I just want to share a few lines from her eulogy of her father, Rabbi. She said, "You were a soft and wonderful grandfather who loved his grandchildren with all his soul. You loved the trips around the kibbutz and looked forward to them. To sit and rest on a bench, to laugh with Mom, with Elad. I always feared that you would die of high blood pressure or too much ice cream, which you loved so much. And I wish it was because of that. But you did not die in peace. You died in terror." Karmit's father, Rami, is only one of 1,200. How can that be? How can that be? I can barely wrap my head around a number like 1,200 Ramis. I can't possibly remember all of their names or know all of their stories, even though I wish I could. As I've been struggling with this, I keep telling myself, I should have figured out how to mourn on this scale. By now, after all these years, I should have learned, because I have a much longer relationship with a much larger number. And we all do. And you all know the number. I've been trying to fathom 6 million since before I even knew how many zeros 6 million meant. When I was a kid, I learned about a group of middle school students in rural Tennessee who were around my same age, and they were also struggling with the magnitude of 6 million. And so they decided to collect 6 million paper clips. My class was assigned to send in our own paper clips to aid in their efforts. And I have this a really vivid memory of taping paper clips to, I don't even know if they still use wide-ruled notebook paper these days, but I remember taping my paper clips to wide-ruled notebook paper and addressing an envelope. Do people do that today? You're addressing an envelope to Tennessee. The millions of paper clips that these students collected filled an authentic German rail car that was later dedicated as their own small children's Holocaust museum. And they called it the Paper Clips Project, which extended over several years and was ultimately turned into a documentary. If you've seen, or I recommend finding it online to watch, it's really worth watching. I don't know if those paper clips helped me to understand 6 million dead. Maybe nothing can. But I did learn this. We have to try to grasp the scope of these enormous losses. Whether it's 6 million or 1,200, we have a long history of figuring out how to understand and respond to tragedy. So let's look at 1,200. In paper clips, here's a paper clip. This is a standard, regular paper clip. It's about 1.3 inches long. And 1,200, if we line them up, would be about 137 feet. And this morning I was trying to count in steps how long that would go from here. And I got all the way to the lobby. And maybe it would have gone, if I had been more exact, maybe it would have even gone farther. Another way that's one way, the paper clips. Another way to try to look at 1,200. This one's hard. I mean, they're all hard, but this one's really hard. Think about the sanctuary on the high holidays with both benders open and filled with seats. I asked Heather exactly like how many seats were set up, and it was somewhere around 1,150. It wasn't even at 1,200. I try with the paper clips or imagining seats set up, but 1,200 dead is still unfathomable to me. Yet I know I must fathom it. We owe the dead and we owe ourselves the respect of witnessing or trying to witness the scope of this kind of a great loss. So I look to physical symbols, or I look to our tradition. How does the Torah handle incomprehensible numbers? God promises Abraham, I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that only if one can count the dust of the earth, then your offspring too can be counted. In other words, a number so high that it's beyond his imagination. God then leads him outside and points, if I guess God can point. He says, look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. God knows we can't count them. So shall your offspring be, God says. We get the sense that really we aren't supposed to be able to count that high. And later in the Torah, also after the story of the binding of Isaac, God promises again, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands of the seashore. And 2 generations later, to Abraham's grandson Jacob, God again promises, your descendants shall be as numerous as the dust of the earth. How many is that? The stars in the sky, the sand of the sea, the dust of the earth. I appreciate the Torah's poetic use of simile. But the truth is, I am no closer to knowing what those numbers really mean. And maybe that's the point. Sometimes we are presented with a magnitude that we can understand and calculate intellectually. We all know what 1,200 means. We all know that. But emotionally, it's like grains of sand by the sea. It's beyond our comprehension. And that's okay. But we still have to mourn. So how do we mourn when our dead are as numerous as the stars in the sky? Because today they are. I asked my dad about the numbers of stars. He's a serious but amateur astronomer. I asked him to fact check this a little bit. Is it really about the same as the number of stars in the sky? And so he guessed that there are approximately 2 with 21 zeros, and there's a word for that, but it's not interesting. Number of stars or only to some of us it's interesting. Number of stars in the universe. But only to us here on Earth, only about 5,000 are even theoretically visible in the perfect darkest night in the most rural desert area. And that 5,000 number is in the general realm of our 1,200 number. So that's pretty close. But he pointed out something. He said, in reality, we see many fewer stars because of light pollution, because of the artificial light that's part of our civilization. And so we went out into the backyard and I counted only 13 stars the other night. And so too, we cannot truly see all 1,200 of our dead at once. Maybe it's a little closer to the 13 that we can see in urban areas with all the light. So, refining our question, how do we mourn today when our dead are as numerous as the stars in the sky, but we cannot see or connect with all of them at once? Here my mom chimed in with her wisdom, reassuring us. She said, it doesn't matter that you can't see all the stars in the sky at once. It just matters that they're there. It just matters that they're there. She's so brilliant. And so too, it just matters that they're there with mourning the dead. Even if we can't remember all the names, even if we can't fathom the unfathomable, they're still there. And depending on where we're looking from, who we are, how we mourn, we can each remember the certain stars that we can see. My parents' approach to stars and mourning is in line with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's teaching technique to translate statistics into people. In other words, that we should always try to translate numbers into stories, because numbers, when applied to people, it's hard for us to connect to those big numbers. So we should always use stories. And that is the closest that I have come to an answer on how to mourn when there are too many to mourn. So in just a couple of minutes, I will invite you to take one of these pages. I printed about 100 different biographies of October 7th victims, so that together we can translate the statistics into people, into stories. So I'll give these out in just a minute, but I want to share one of them with you first. One of the 1,200 is Moriah Raviv. I don't know if you can see, but this is what these pages look like. They're from the Times of Israel, and it's on their website. In her memorial photograph, she's standing in front of a mountain in hiking gear. And she looks happily exhausted and accomplished, like she's just climbed to an impressive height. She's maybe climbed a mountain. And she's looking down with a humble head tilt. Moriah was murdered at the Supernova Music Festival that she attended with friends who were also murdered that day. And they were all there celebrating her 23rd birthday, which would have been the next day. In the Army as a drone instructor in the Intelligence Corps, or before that as a volunteer firefighter in high school, Moriah was known for following her own path. A friend of hers said she never gave up. Her mother remembered she always brought light everywhere she went. Wherever she was, there was so much light. Like Abraham before us, who tried to imagine all the future generations at once, today we also try to count what cannot be counted. We remember our dead who in life were among those uncountable stars of Abraham's descendants, and who now in death are returned to the uncountable dust of the earth. Although 1,200 is still a stretch for my heart to hold. And add to that the millions who are mourning those 1,200, and among them us. Although it is hard, I am so grateful to be here with all of you so that we can mourn together. So I invite us to each add to our personal Yizkor prayers, to each take one of these different names and different stories and add one more person to your personal prayers. Add one more person whose first yahrzeit is today. Zichronam livracha.